We don't pay you to feel sorry for people. We pay you to follow the rules. That's what Tessa Griggs spat across the dining floor right before Evelyn Hart lost the only job keeping her son's medicine cabinet from going empty. But what if losing everything was exactly what it took to change everything? This isn't a story about heroes. It's about someone who chose to care when it cost the most. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The alarm didn't ring, it rasped awake like something older than the walls. Evelyn silenced it with a flick breath, fogging in the frozen dark. The radiator had stayed quiet all night. Across the room, the nebulizer whispered beside her son. Miles was 7 small for his age, hair a mess of tufts. The sound made him seem older than he was, like someone already worn down. She touched his forehead, no fever. That was something. In the alcove, they called a kitchen. The kettle clanged before the flame caught. A pill bottle rattled, 1 dose left, maybe 2. The pharmacy had called. Her wallet hadn't answered. Coffee scalded her tongue, bitter but warm. On the fridge, her own handwriting stared back: Monday gas bill, Tuesday Miles's inhaler, Wednesday groceries or rent. She turned away. The hallway still slept when she closed the door. Frost silvered the street. A bench sagged under an old man wrapped in an army blanket. His chest rattled like a furnace gone cold. She laid a paper bundle in his lap: peanut butter, banana, white bread. No words, just a nod. The bus screeched. She stepped aboard. The doors clapped shut. By the time she reached the dining floor, her body had already slipped into routine: coffee, poured plates, cleared silverware, reset. Hair tight at dawn had loosened from sweat. The clock above the beverage station read 8:06. The back door swung open. Heels, sharp measured, familiar, clicked like a metronome. Tessa Griggs had arrived. Clipboard tucked under one arm, lips pressed to a line, she swept the room like a general. Navy blazer, flawless bun, a watch worth more than rent. You're 2 minutes late. No greeting. Still folding napkins, Evelyn angled her head. The bus got stuck. There's black ice. A glance cut her off. This isn't a shelter, Tessa said. This is High Grove dining property. We operate on precision. When you're late, labor metrics suffer. And when labor metrics suffer, so do bonuses. She flipped a page as if already bored. Evelyn gave a tight nod and walked away. She didn't mention leaving before sunrise or the sandwich placed in a stranger's hands. Behind the beverage station, Carmen Ruiz slid pancakes onto a tray, movements smooth, practiced. Keep your chin up, she murmured. That one feeds off fear. At 1:03, the bell above the door gave its tired jingle. A man stepped in. The nearest tables hushed. Conversations didn't stop but slowed. Even the register's beep cut sharper than before. Tessa's head turned just enough to register him. Her jaw flexed. Voice crisp, she whispered toward Evelyn. We're full. Tell him to leave. There's room, I said we're full. Her eyes never lifted from the clipboard. Fingers tightened around her pen until the knuckles blanched. Evelyn didn't argue, nor did she nod. She simply lifted a menu from the counter and walked toward him as if that had been the plan all along. He hadn't moved. Snow dripped from his shoulders. His eyes searched the room, unsure if this was mistake or miracle. Table 7, she said softly. His gaze found hers. No smile, no confusion. Only recognition, as if he had finally spotted something solid in a world that kept looking through him. He followed. At the far end, a booth sat tucked beside the window, half-shadowed, untouched since breakfast. She wiped the table as he lowered himself into the seat cautiously, as if testing whether it would hold. Light slanted across the wood. Dust motes spun through the sunbeam. The menu slid into place, untouched. Near the coffee machine, Tessa jotted something onto her clipboard. Her expression didn't change, but the pause in her hand lingered too long. Evelyn remained by the booth. She didn't ask what he wanted. She simply waited. The break room door stuck, like always, groaning before giving way. Beyond it, the clatter of plates and hiss of grills dulled to a hum beneath fluorescent lights that slowed time without ever letting it rest. She dropped onto the wooden bench, fingers grazing chips, worn by years of rushed lunches and frustrated elbows. The air reeked of microwave cheese and old oil, undercut by a metallic tang that caught in her throat. From her apron pocket came the morning's tips, crumpled ones, a single 5 coins, still dusted with sugar from someone's dessert. She pressed each bill flat against her thigh, ironing them like old creases in memory. $12.70. No sigh, no eye roll. Just a stare held too long before reaching into her bag for a small white envelope. Across the front, faded ink read, Miles, refill. A half-torn dinosaur sticker clung to the corner. She slid the cash inside, folded the flap, and tucked it beneath the edge of her lunch container. Next to it, under the clear plastic lid, waited a photo Miles last spring at the playground, arms outstretched, mouth open mid-laugh. She glanced just long enough to feel the weight again. You ever think about just walking out? Carmen's voice drifted from the other end of the bench. She had been there the whole time, unwrapping a tuna sandwich from wax paper. Food that filled the belly without touching the soul. What today, Evelyn asked. A shrug, a bite. Any day, every day. Carmen dabbed mayo from her lip with a napkin folded so neatly it could have been ironed. I used to do what you're doing, she went on. Pay for their coffee, slip an extra muffin in the bag. But it doesn't take long for them to notice. They always notice. Eyes fixed on the floor, Evelyn traced the curls of linoleum peeling at the edges. Her shoes tugged slightly when she shifted. They cut my hours, Carmen said matter of fact. Called it disrupting the flow. That's their code for too soft. So now I stay quiet, work, go home. Safer that way. The door cracked open, breaking the moment. Tessa entered with that same tight-lipped expression she wore, like lipstick, clipboard-ready pen, poised. No greeting, no question. Just Evelyn. You spent over 45 minutes on a $5 ticket, a blink toward the clock above the fridge. Break room minutes always ran faster than the floor. I served his soup. This isn't a mission trip, Tessa cut in, voice sharp as glass on tile. We're not here to offer charity. We are a business. Profit margins don't lie. Your time is an investment. Carmen turned her head just slightly enough to register the exchange. Tessa ignored it, tapped her clipboard, once scribbled and swept out with a trail of lemon-scented air. Silence followed, not heavy but hollow. Evelyn lowered her gaze to her hands. A smear of orange stained her palm, likely from the tomato bisque ladled earlier. She rubbed with a napkin, stopped halfway, let it be. She doesn't see people, Carmen murmured. She sees decimals. A single nod answered not agreement so much as surrender of the neck. When Evelyn finally rose, the envelope in her bag felt lighter. The strap dug into her shoulder as she stepped back into the dining room, sounds swelling with each footfall, silverware scraping ice, clattering into glasses. She lingered behind the service counter, shuffling receipts she didn't need to. From there, table 7 lay in full view. The man was still there. He cradled the spoon as though afraid to waste a drop. Each movement deliberate, reverent. No glance around, no idle chatter, only the act of eating, like memorizing warmth before it vanished. Light from the front window striped his table in pale streaks. A draft lifted the corner of his napkin. A bus rolled past, tires hissing over melting snow. Evelyn tightened her apron strings and stepped forward. By late afternoon, sunlight had turned syrupy gold, bleeding softly through the front windows of the restaurant. Long shadows stretched across the tiled floor, catching dust in midair. The bustle of lunch had ebbed to a slow hum of clinking glasses, low voices, and a bus groaning to a stop across the street. She walked toward the counter with the check for table 7 in hand. No rush. Steps, steady fingers curled gently around the slip of paper. Just another transaction, another line on the register. Nothing in her face betrayed the ripple beneath. The man still sat there, empty bowl nudged aside. His eyes followed the sunlight more than anything, how it warmed the table, how it danced off silverware. When she laid the check in front of him, his gaze flickered as though pulled back from some far-off place. No hurry, she murmured. His hands drifted toward his coat. He patted his chest, then his lap, then both pockets. Brows furrowed. Searching grew frantic under the coat in the threadbare lining. He leaned to check the booth cushion, breath quickening. I had it, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Must have fallen out. Maybe on the bus, I don't know. Panic rose in his eyes. Across the room, Tessa stood near the hostess stand, arms crossed, clipboard tucked beneath her elbow. Silent, but her stare said enough. Evelyn's gaze flicked between them, the man fumbling Tessa's eyes, pressing into her like a thumb against a bruise. For a heartbeat, she froze, then turned. At the counter, the cash drawer slid open. Her crumpled tips from the morning still sat in her apron. A quick count, $14, barely enough. She peeled off a 10, then a 5. Paused. He's probably lying. The thought she ignored. Bills dropped into the drawer the transaction rung as cash. Fingers hovered over the keypad for a breath before pressing total. The register chirped. A receipt whispered out. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. Tessa's voice followed, quiet but sharp enough to cut. You just paid with cash. Evelyn turned slowly, meeting her eyes without blinking. He said he found it, in his back pocket. A pause stretched, not long, but heavy. Tessa tilted her head slightly hawk-like before a dive. A smile crept onto her lips. Small, controlled. Did he? Not a question. No further challenge came. She scribbled on her clipboard and pivoted toward the office. Evelyn watched the heels click away, then looked back to table 7. The man hadn't touched the receipt. Hands rested quietly on the table beside the remains of his meal. A stillness wrapped him, less resignation, more reverence, as though the soup had been more than food, more than heat. Something remembered. She cleared the bowl without words. He didn't stop her, only gave a slow, firm nod before returning to the sunlight creeping across the wood. Later in the employee room, Evelyn sat with elbows braced on her knees, bag open at her feet. The envelope came out thinner than usual, lighter in her hand. She opened the flap. $3. Counted again. Still 3. On the table, Miles's photo caught the overhead light plastic gloss peeling at the corners. His smile wide, toothless, sunburned. Her thumb brushed the edge before sliding it away. The quiet pressed heavier than noise. Folding the envelope twice, she placed it gently back in her bag. Then stilled hands resting in her lap, fingers curled as if cradling something warm that had already cooled. Lunch hour at Stonebridge hit like a freight train. Plates hissed against hot trays, silverware clinked in a dissonant chorus, and smoke from the grill hovered just beneath the ceiling vents. Noise pulsed through the air. Orders, shouted names, repeated glasses, trembling in hurried hands. Apron damp against her back, Evelyn threaded between tables. Table 12 needed refills. A family at 6 wanted their burgers refired, and someone at the bar had already asked twice for ranch. Lips pressed in a hard line, she balanced 2 baskets of fries and a sweating soda cup, moving with the speed of necessity. From across the room came a sharp command. Everyone pause. The floor didn't still at once, but the tone dragged the volume down. Heads turned. Forks hovered midway to mouths. Near the kitchen door stood Tessa. One manicured hand raised the other, clutching her clipboard, until the rings bit pale into her knuckles. Evelyn Hart. The full name fell like a curtain. Her steps slowed, then stopped. Tray balanced in her hands, she looked up. Would you like to explain, Tessa called, why there's a transaction from yesterday with a missing balance? Murmurs stirred the air. Behind the coffee station, Carmen froze halfway through filling creamers, her brow knitting. Heels clicked as Tessa advanced, every syllable clipped. You processed a cash payment without a tip or table note. That violates audit protocol. It suggests a deliberate pause manipulation. I paid it myself. Evelyn's voice carried without rising. He didn't have anything to eat. You're not paid to make judgment calls, Tessa snapped. You're paid to serve. Accurately, within policy, and frankly, this isn't the first time. A silence spread like slow fog. Even the grill cooks halted. Turning to the others, Tessa declared, We've warned her before about bending protocol. This is a liability. It's a matter of trust. Carmen stepped forward. She's never stolen a thing. She gave her own money. That's irrelevant, came the reply, sharp and dismissive. We are not a charity, we're a business. If an employee can't separate personal feeling from duty, she becomes a risk. Still gripping the tray, Evelyn felt one napkin tear beneath condensation, the basket of fries beginning to tilt. Effective immediately, Tessa announced, clipboard rising like a gavel. Evelyn Hart is no longer employed here. The room held its breath. At table 7, a tall man in flannel slowly set down his fork, reached into his wallet, and placed a $20 bill beside his plate. No eye contact, just a nod to no one in particular. The tray found its way onto the server station. Evelyn's fingers lingered on the soda cup before letting it go. 2 short tugs loosed the apron strings. She folded the cloth into itself. No words left her. Carmen touched her shoulder lightly. Wait. Don't let her. But Evelyn was already moving. Past the hostess stand, past the stairs. Through the heavy glass door, the air cut sharp. Wind worried at her coat still folded over one arm. She didn't put it on, just kept walking. The street hummed with late lunch traffic, salt-stained tires, muffled hip-hop from a car idling at the curb, the metallic rattle of a shopping cart dragged across frozen concrete. At the corner, she turned, crossed at the light. A gust pulled a paper napkin from her pocket, tumbling end over end into the gutter. Not once did she look back. That week she left without the brown paper bag that usually waited near the back leftover rolls, maybe a cup of soup. Carmen always made sure there was something. This time her hands were empty. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled in after a hard day and refused to leave. Wind scratched at the windows, its whine slipping through the gaps along the sill. The radiator clanked once, then fell silent again. Light from the single bulb above the kitchen cast everything in a low amber haze. Evelyn sat at the table, threadbare sweater draped over her shoulders, a half-full mug cooling between her palms. Across the room, the baby monitor crackled faintly. Miles coughed in his sleep, then turned breath settling back into rhythm. She didn't lift her head. Unopened mail curled at the corners, warped by steam from the pot of lentils she'd left untouched. Her fingers moved to the drawer beneath the sink. Wood stuck on its warped track before giving way, revealing a narrow cedar box wrapped in a faded dish towel. Hands hesitated, then almost reverently peeled back the cloth. Remnants of another life lay there, a bundle of photos tied with baker's twine, a menu card from the first restaurant Dane had worked at, a receipt stained with coffee and scribbled with a note, "Don't forget vanilla for the birthday cake." A faint smile touched her lips as the twine came loose. On top lay a photo of Dane at the back exit of an old restaurant in Logan Square. Hair tucked into a crooked cap cigarette between his lips, one hand holding a bowl of frosting. Tired, yet with a glint of quiet mischief in his eyes. On the back in her handwriting, "Birthday boy got cake. Manager got mad." That night he'd stayed late baking a strawberry cake for Alejandro, the dishwasher's 8-year-old son, using leftovers from pastry prep. The boy's mother had cried in the alley when she saw it. 3 days later, Dane was let go. Misuse of product, they called it. That had been the start. Not the worst day, just the one that began the slow unraveling. From there came job after job, each one shorter than the last. Interviews where eyes stopped listening after the word terminated, bills piling, Miles born 2 months early, then silence, long stretches of silence, until one Tuesday afternoon, when she came home to find the kitchen window, open snow in his coffee cup, and his coat still hanging on the hook. Evelyn drew in a breath. It caught at the back of her throat. The photo went face down as she leaned forward, arms folded on the table forehead, pressed against them. Shoulders lifted once, then fell. The phone lit up on the counter beside the fruit bowl. A name, Carmen Ruiz. If you ever want to tell that story. "I know someone at the Tribune." The message blinked softly, waiting. Her eyes lingered. Carmen had known about Dane. Not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that Evelyn's stubborn kindness wasn't new, it had teeth. History. Guilt baked in like an old recipe passed down but never written. Fingers closed loosely around the phone. The screen reflected the kitchen ceiling, warped from moisture near the vent. Her other hand drifted to the edge of the table, tracing a circle into the wood. No reply came, just a long stare. Almost absently, her gaze shifted toward the top shelf above the fridge, where an old plastic mug stood like a sentry. Miles's empty inhaler rattled within light as air filled with nothing. Her jaw tightened. The phone slid open. A number saved, no message, no call. Only a quiet addition to her contact story. Tribune. Next morning, Evelyn pushed open the cafe door, warmth folding around her like a worn sweater as the bell chimed overhead. From the counter rose the hiss of a waffle iron tangled with the sweet trace of cinnamon and burnt sugar. She settled at a corner table near the window, hands cupped around a paper cup gone lukewarm. Across from her, a young woman in a navy scarf scribbled notes with restless energy, pausing only to nudge her glasses back up her nose. "Sorry, I just want to make sure I've got this straight," the reporter said. Her name was Becca from the Northside Sentinel, a community paper Evelyn hadn't heard of until Carmen passed along the number. You were fired after using your own money to pay for a customer's meal. He didn't have it. Evelyn's voice stayed quiet but steady. I couldn't pretend I didn't see that. Becca nodded slowly, letting the silence hold. A delivery truck rumbled past. Evelyn's gaze slipped to the street, scanning the sidewalk out of habit, as though waiting for something or someone to appear. What did your manager say? She said compassion doesn't belong in business. Eyes lowered to her coffee. She said I was a liability. Becca leaned in, pen poised. So why did you do it? Why risk your job like that for someone you didn't know? No answer came at once. Fingers drifted along the cup's fraying sleeve. A scrap tore free, fluttered down to the table. Breath slipped out in a quiet release. Because I've seen what happens, she said finally, eyes lifting, when no one does the right thing. Becca blinked, pen stilled. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. From across the cafe, a waitress shouted an order number. A toddler banged a plastic spoon against the table, squealing. Evelyn sipped her bitter coffee, unflinching. Thank you, Becca said softly, for trusting me with this. A small nod. Coat gathered. It's not just about me. There are a lot of people like him, like Dane was. You give people nothing, then blame them for having nothing. The door chimed as she stepped back into the cold. 2 hours later, the article went live online. Waitress fired for feeding a hungry man. It spread in ripples through neighborhood circles, tagged and reposted, picked up by a few small outlets. At the top sat a picture of Evelyn in front of Stonebridge Grill, eyes tired, snow gathering in her lashes. Across the city, a man stirred espresso in a spotless porcelain cup. Alone at a marble counter built for suits and quiet meetings, he drew little attention the way he preferred it. Dorian Caldwell scrolled through the article again, finger resting on the paragraph that named Evelyn Hart, widow of Dane Hart, a former pastry chef dismissed by the same corporate entity. A slow blink. The spoon in his hand stopped. In the cafe window, his reflection showed sharp cheekbones, silver at the temples, glasses, perched low, a face older than he remembered becoming. One tap on the table summoned a waitress with a smile too bright. Anything else, she asked. He waved her off. When she left, he leaned back, gaze fixed on the screen. For a long moment, he sat still, one finger tracing the rim of his cup. Memory pulled him backward, a meeting room, a signature on a termination form D. Hart scrawled in red beside unauthorized use of inventory. He hadn't thought of it since. Now the past stared from his phone, not as memory, but consequence. His jaw tightened. The espresso cooled. Later at his desk, a tumbler of mineral water clicked against wood. Snow drifted past the 40th floor, the city blurred in gray and brake lights. The article glared bold on his monitor, waitress fired for feeding a hungry man. He read the first paragraph, then the second slower. A cursor blinked beneath Evelyn's name, as though waiting for him to respond. Her photo filled the screen, standing at Stonebridge Grill in a faded coat, snow gathering in her lashes, her mouth steady, her eyes anything but. A few keystrokes opened the HR database. Evelyn Hart. The file pinged open server. Employment start 2021. Termination February 14, 2025. Reason violation of financial transaction protocols. A footnote linked her to Dane Hart. Tightness gripped his chest. Another search. Dane Hart, pastry chef, employed 2014-2018, terminated for unauthorized use of kitchen resources. Leaning back, chair creaking, he caught a flicker of memory. Dane in the staff kitchen after hours, piping icing onto a small cake. Quiet, earnest, fired without warning. His fingers clenched the armrest. The article's last line echoed. Sometimes kindness costs more than cruelty ever will. He rose abruptly, paced once, twice, then halted at the window. Below, the city churned delivery vans, bundled pedestrians, the subway rumbling like a second heartbeat. His reflection hovered in the glass-tailored suit, graying temples, eyes hollowed not by age but something heavier. 3 decades of empire stared back. Profits, margins, streamlining machinery, chewing through the very people it was built on. Or rather, the people it never intended to serve. Turnover data flashed onto the screen at his command. Fingers flew, clicks stacking. Numbers appeared: Northwest Division, highest employee turnover rate. Last 18 months, Stonebridge Region. Manager Tessa Griggs. A single blink. Then Dorian jabbed the intercom. Marcy, he said, voice low and clipped. Get Brent Halpern on the line. Now. Minutes passed before the click. Dorian. Didn't expect. How long have we had that manager at Stonebridge? Tessa Griggs. Brent hesitated. Since 2022. Promoted internally. Why do you monitor exit interviews or just shred them? We collect them, sure, but most of it's the usual hour stress. She's bleeding staff like a stuck pig, Brent. Morale in the gutter, and now she's firing people for feeding the hungry. That's the culture you're letting grow under my name, a throat cleared. It's a tight ship, Dorian. She delivers results. Results mean nothing if they're built on fear and turnover. Okay, do you want me to? Not yet. I'm going there myself. You're what the call ended. For a moment he stayed still, then reached for his overcoat. Snow pressed hard against the windows, muting the city in a dull hush. He barely noticed. Out in the hall, his assistant looked up. Sir, have the car brought around. To where Stonebridge Grill, he said, already striding toward the elevator. No calls, no press. Cancel the rest of my day. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. The elevator doors slid shut. His reflection met him again, smaller now, framed by brushed steel and silence. Somewhere down below, a woman with $3 to her name had shaken the scaffolding of everything he thought immovable. Miles clung to Evelyn's neck, breath damp against her collar. The cold scraped her lungs raw as she stepped off the curb, boots sinking into slush. She tightened her hold to shield him from the wind funneling between buildings. They passed a boarded-up laundromat on West Leland, its neon sign still flickering despite weeks without customers. A plastic bag skittered across the sidewalk, snagged on a parking meter, before collapsing like a sigh. One hand pressed Miles's cap, the other gripped her phone like a lifeline. It buzzed again. Unknown number, no contact photo, just 6 words, someone would like to apologize. 9:45 a.m. Car sent. Evelyn stopped walking right there in the middle of the sidewalk, exhaust plumes curling puddles gray at her boots. Breath stalled in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the pause before a memory returns. Carmen's apartment sat above a florist shop, still shuttered for winter, its window filled with plastic poinsettias fading in the sun. Evelyn climbed the narrow stairwell, boots thudding against worn carpet, each step louder than the last. Carmen answered with a look that said she already knew. Miles wriggled down from Evelyn's arms and vanished into the kitchen like he belonged there. The inhaler passed into Carmen's hand. Then the phone. A setup Evelyn tried for a joke. No smile. Carmen stirred chamomile steam curling between them. Maybe, but maybe not. Sometimes what scares us most is someone actually meaning it. You think it's real? I think the fact you're asking means you want it to be. Miles reappeared, mouthful of cereal, pointing at cartoons on a tablet. Carmen adjusted the volume. Evelyn lingered by the door, coat-zipped fingers twitching at her pocket seam. A packet of tissues pressed into her palm. Carmen's voice lowered. If you go, go because you choose to, not because you're afraid not to. The car waited, sleek black-tinted windows masking the driver. Not the kind of ride that stopped for people like her, not anymore. On the sidewalk, snowflakes caught in her lashes, melting into her skin like warnings. She squinted at the darkened glass, but no face appeared. A quiet click and the back door opened. Warmth closed around her as she slid into the leather seat, cedar scent threaded with something expensive she couldn't name. Coat rustled, hands folded tight in her lap. No words from the driver, only a nod through the mirror before the car slipped into traffic. Buildings drifted past like memories, the bakery where Dane once brought home day-old rolls, the corner where rain caught them kissing without an umbrella, the clinic where Miles was diagnosed. Breath fogged the window left unwiped. A billboard flashed, High Grove Dining, where elegance meets efficiency. She almost laughed. Almost. The car turned off Lakeshore Drive, weaving into the district where towers rose like judgment glass and steel cutting the gray sky. She hadn't been this far downtown in months. The driver pulled into a loading lane before a brick-walled cafe with wide windows. He stepped out, opened her door, offered a hand she didn't take. Someone is waiting, he said. Evelyn paused with one boot still on the curb. The salted sidewalk gleamed. Her reflection shimmered in the glass as she approached the words, Bluefinch, scripted across the door. Warm light pooled across tiled floors, cinnamon and espresso curling in the air. At the back sat a man with gray hair and a pressed coat, stirring a spoon in an untouched cup. He didn't wave but looked up the moment she entered. The bell above the door chimed faintly, nearly drowned by clattering dishes and the hiss of the steamer, yet sharp enough to cut through tension at Stonebridge Grill. Heads turned. A man in a charcoal wool suit had stepped in from the cold brushing snow from his shoulders. Two aides flanked him like Shadow's tablets, ready eyes sweeping the floor with forensic calm. Dorian Caldwell didn't smile. He slipped off his gloves with deliberate calm, tucked them into his coat, then spoke low but caring. "Excuse me." Conversation died. Forks froze midair. Even a cook peered around the pass. Tessa smoothed her skirt and stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, we weren't expecting. I'm not here for pleasantries." His gaze moved past her to the servers. "Have everyone step away from their stations. I'd like to address the team." Her eyes widened. "Now, sir, we're mid-service now." The tone stayed even but final. No argument left. Tessa turned voice brittle as she gave the order. Trays landed on counters, staff backed away. A customer muttered about coffee but fell silent when Dorian's glance brushed her table. Chairs scraped, plates stilled. Within seconds, the room froze. Then the door opened again. Evelyn walked in, boots leaving wet marks on black and white tile. Carmen followed, tote-clutched gaze wary in the hush. The coat Evelyn wore sagged at the shoulders, borrowed. Hands bare despite the cold chin, lifted eyes steady. Dorian turned. Their gazes met, not for the first time but different now. No bowls of soup, no distractions, just recognition. Uneasy. A fork clattered in the back. No one moved to pick it up. Tessa's throat tightened. "Why is she—" "She's here because I asked her," Dorian said, still watching Evelyn. "Please, let's sit." He motioned toward table 7, the same booth where a man in a frayed coat once ate soup like it mattered. No one sat. Adjusting his cufflinks, he gestured instead toward a booth, then faced the staff. "Everyone, I'd appreciate a few minutes. What I have to say concerns this restaurant and what it has become." Tessa stiffened near the register. Carmen leaned toward Evelyn. "Still time to walk out," she whispered. Evelyn stepped forward, past the hostess stand, past table 3 where she once refilled iced tea, past the busboy who had carried her tray when her wrist gave out. She reached table 7 and stood. Not across from Dorian, not beside him, facing the staff. One of the new waitresses, barely 20, tugged at her apron, unsure whether to look away or watch. The grill hissed in the background. No one touched it. Snow tapped against the windows. Evelyn drew a breath, palm resting on the table for balance. At last, Dorian lowered himself into the opposite seat. Everyone else stayed on their feet, waiting. He reached into his leather briefcase, drew out a slim folder, and set it flat on the table. The thud of its spine carried farther than expected. He opened it slowly, almost ceremonially, like a pastor revealing a passage too long buried. "I want to tell you about David Hart," he said, voice low, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "A pastry chef in this company. 6 years. Clean record. No complaints." Evelyn didn't move. Her breath-shallowed eyes fixed on him as if watching someone exhume a grave. A few weeks before Christmas, he used leftovers items meant for the trash to bake a birthday cake for a dishwasher who'd been with us 13 years. No cost, no charge, just flour sugar kindness. He turned a page. The rustle was loud in the stillness. He was fired 2 days later. Misappropriation of inventory. A technicality. A policy we wrote. One with no room for discretion. A whisper stirred through the staff like dry leaves in wind. No one met Evelyn's gaze except Carmen, who stepped closer and set 2 fingers on her shoulder, soft and steady. Tessa's face had drained to gray. Her clipboard hung limp at her side. Dorian pressed on. "After that, your husband applied to 3 restaurants, 2 owned by us. Rejected all 3. His name carried a note in the system, flagged. Policy breach." Evelyn's knuckles whitened on the table edge. Her jaw trembled but held. Her eyes glossed, unblinking, barely breathing. A single tear slid down and darkened the wood. "I knew his name when I saw yours," Dorian said, meeting her eyes. "It hit me like passing a man bleeding on the sidewalk years ago, then facing his widow today." The room didn't stir. Even the snow seemed to pause mid-fall. Tessa stepped forward. "That wasn't my decision," she said, voice brittle. I wasn't involved. Dorian looked up. But you celebrated it. You told that story to new hires as proof of zero tolerance. I've read your script. Her mouth opened, then closed. Nothing left to rearrange. A busser lowered his tray. A customer whispered to her husband, who whispered back. Evelyn's voice when it came was raw. He spent 6 months thinking he was worthless. He believed in second chances. That if you kept showing up, did the right thing, someone would notice. She lifted her gaze. No one did. Dorian swallowed. No, he admitted. They didn't. Evelyn inhaled slow and shaking, then exhaled like someone fighting not to break. The folder still lay open. A clipped photo showed Dane in a white coat sleeves, rolled hands dusted with flour, grinning caught mid-laugh. Carmen reached over and turned the photo toward Evelyn. No one spoke for a long time. Dorian straightened, closed the folder, and smoothed a hand over its cover as if undoing damage with touch alone. I can't bring him back, he said, voice thinner now. And I can't erase what the system has done. But I can say before every person here that it ends today. He let the silence breathe. We can either let this rot keep spreading in the name of profit, or we fix it. Now. His gaze circled the room. Cooks, servers, managers, even customers frozen mid-bite. A pen slid from his coat pocket, but he held it, still eyes locked on Evelyn. The hush thickened, dense as snowfall. No one moved. Evelyn rose straighter, shoulders steady. Her eyes still carried years of weight, but something in them had sharpened, like light finding a crack in stone. I'm not here for my job back, she said, voice low, but carrying. I'm here because this place turned decent people into rule followers, too afraid to be human. Her words hung. Carmen folded her arms, a barback nodded faintly. You ask what I want. No more lists punishing people for doing right. Let frontline workers help write the policies they live under. And stop letting Tessa's clipboard be a weapon. Tessa flinched, mouth opening, but no words came. I followed the rules, Evelyn said. Until I couldn't. Until someone needed soup and all I had was $3 and a choice. Dorian didn't interrupt. Didn't posture. Just listen the way you listen when you've done harm. A line cook lifted a hand. She's right. I've seen people cut for clocking out 3 minutes late. From the far side, a waitress I gave my coat to a woman shaking in the cold. Got written up for inappropriate conduct. Murmurs spread like ripples from Evelyn's center. Tessa tried once more. This isn't how protocol gets rewritten. No, Dorian said evenly. But maybe it's how it should have been all along. Evelyn held his gaze. If you want to fix this, it can't be a press release or a slogan. You have to change the math. Stop calculating worth by tip averages and minute counts. He nodded slowly as if surprising himself. Tell me where to start. Reinstate every worker dismissed for compassion, she said. Back pay if possible. And Tessa, don't fire her. Retrain her by the people she hurt. The words landed differently, not vengeance. Responsibility. Tessa looked away, lips pressed thin. Evelyn stepped closer, not confrontational but firm. Let Carmen lead training on worker rights. Let us draft the new code of conduct. Include names, faces, not just metrics. A single clap sounded near the entry. Another followed, then 2 more. Not applause, solidarity. Dorian scanned the room, then looked back at her. Done. We'll start with Stonebridge. Piloted here. A breath slipped from her, not relief exactly, but release. Carmen's palm warmed her back. You did good, mija. The smile that came was lopsided, grounded, rather than triumphant. The pen extended again, this time to Carmen. She blinked. You're letting a waitress write policy? I'm letting the people who live it rewrite it. By the window, sunlight broke through gray, refracting in the glass. Snow still fell softer now. Noise returned. Orders called, plates clattering, laughter sparking from the kitchen. Life resuming, tentative but real. Her phone buzzed Carmen's number. Miles had eaten, was napping, still asking about his mom. Thumb hovering above replies, she realized for the first time in weeks she didn't feel forced to choose between being a mother and being someone who made change. Across the room, Dorian's gaze met hers, not as CEO, not as a man repairing an empire, but as someone who finally understood the cost. She nodded. He returned it. No hierarchy. Just two people amid the wreckage. Beginning at last to rebuild. Dorian's voice carried across the dining room, quiet yet undeniable. We're founding something new today, he said, stepping to the center clipboard, replaced by a folded document in his hand. It's called the High Grove Cares Initiative. It begins here. The words swept the restaurant like a gust of wind, stilling spoons mid-stir, pausing conversations before they could restart. Evelyn stood beside Carmen, pulse quickening in her wrist. This isn't PR, Dorian continued. It's not a Band-Aid. It's policy built with the people who were left behind. He turned toward Evelyn. And if she's willing, I want Evelyn Hart to be one of the first to help shape it. Someone dropped a dish in the back. No one moved to pick it up. Evelyn didn't speak right away. Her fingers curled slightly against her palm, then released. She stepped forward just enough to close the space between herself and Dorian. I'll do it, she said. But only if people like Carmen have a seat at the table too. Carmen's eyebrows lifted. She hadn't expected to be pulled into it, not allowed, not like this. But when she caught Evelyn's eye, her chin dipped once in quiet agreement. Dorian nodded. They will. He reached into his coat, pulling a folded sheet from a stiff envelope. His assistant, standing a step behind, handed over a pen. This is the initial suspension order for Tessa Griggs, pending a full internal investigation into labor practices, retaliation, and policy abuse. The silence thickened. Tessa, for the first time, didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice or deny it. Arms stayed at her sides, clipboard tucked like a forgotten weapon. Something in her face had crumpled, not with fury, but with the slow erosion of certainty. Dorian faced her. You had metrics, you had margins. What you didn't have was mercy. Her lips parted, then closed again. A small, almost imperceptible nod followed, as if something within finally broke loose. She didn't resist when the assistant collected her badge. Passing Evelyn, she kept her gaze down. Snow dusted the sidewalk beyond the glass flakes dissolving on car hoods. In the dining room, warmth spread not from heat but from a shift in gravity. The balance had tilted back. Evelyn stepped backward as Dorian finished his signature. Carmen, rooted beside her, pulled her into a hug. Not tight, not dramatic, just firm enough to lift years of weight between them. You did it, Carmen whispered. No, Evelyn murmured, throat tightening. We did. Clapping began from the back. Another joined. Not thunderous, just acknowledgement. One by one, employees added their hands, not because they were told to, but because someone had finally done what they all wished to. Dorian stepped aside. I'll be back, he said to the staff. But this time I'll be listening more than talking. Her eyes drifted across the dish pit, the coffee station, the cracked tile no one ever fixed. For a moment it wasn't failure or loss, just a place. One that had hurt her, but also one where something new could begin. Light broke through a passing cloud, slanting across gold lettering etched on the window. Stonebridge Grill. She held the sight, not as the place that fired her, but as the one where she finally stood still and refused to step back. Snowflakes caught the sun just right, glittering like truths suspended in the air. The street beyond stayed slick and gray, but rooftops glinted above like a promise just beginning to thaw. Wind bit at her cheeks as Evelyn pushed through the park stroller wheels, crunching over slush and gravel. Bare trees arched overhead like old bones against a pale sky. Nothing bloomed yet, not even hope, she thought. At the curve of the path, the stone bench appeared, gray, weather-worn, flecked with lichen. Evelyn slowed, lifted Miles from the stroller, and let him waddle toward the swings, bundled so tight he moved like a penguin. A smile tugged at her lips for a moment. Carmen arrived minutes later, two cardboard cups clutched in gloved hands. I almost slipped twice on that hill, she muttered, breath clouding as she passed one over. Either Chicago needs to salt the sidewalks, or I need better boots. A soft laugh escaped Evelyn. They sat stone cold beneath them, silence filling the space without emptiness. He loved this park, she said at last. Dane. Every Saturday after work, he brought Miles here. Even after losing the job, he came, just to pretend things were normal. Carmen watched Miles climb a ladder, hat sliding sideways. He ever talk about it? Losing the job, a small shake of the head. He didn't need to. I saw it in the way he moved, slower, quieter, like something had been pulled out of him. She stared at the ground. Once he baked a cake for a dishwasher's birthday. Just a silly chocolate thing with a whipped cream smiley. They fired him the next week. Misuse of inventory. Her grip tightened on the cup. I told him we'd be fine, but he stopped coming here, stopped shaving, slept more than Miles. The wind rattled dead leaves across the path. Her voice dropped. One morning I found him on this bench, staring at nothing. I asked what he was thinking. He said, I thought if you did good things, someone would notice. Neither woman spoke. From her pocket, she drew a worn slip of paper, unfolded it with care. Feed the hungry no matter what. The night they fired him, he wrote this, she whispered. Slipped it in my lunchbox. You kept it all this time, Carmen asked. A nod. Thought if I held on long enough, it might make sense. Snow whirled in a gust. Miles shouted from the monkey bars. Evelyn lifted a hand in reply, then folded the note and tucked it away again. All this time, she murmured, I've been waiting for someone to say sorry. For him. For me. For what happened. Maybe the apology isn't supposed to come from someone else, Carmen said. The words stung, but no tears came. Just that old tightness in her ribs. I haven't sat here since his memorial, she admitted. I thought if I did, I'd fall apart. But you didn't. A hollow laugh. No, I didn't. The clouds thinned shafts of light slipping through. One beam landed on the empty half of the bench. Evelyn laid her hand there. Sometimes it feels like he's still here, she whispered. Not as a ghost. More like, I'm finally carrying him forward. Miles charged up the hill, cheeks flushed. Mom, come push me. She rose, joints stiff, but heart lighter. Tossing the cup, she turned to Carmen with a nod. Let's go. Spring's not far off. The hall wasn't grand. Rows of chairs, a navy-draped table, the High Grove emblem glinting under harsh lights. Reporters clustered near the back, adjusting lenses, murmuring into recorders. Evelyn sat at the front row's edge, palms flat on her skirt. Familiar faces dotted the room, regional managers, PR staff, Carmen a row behind with a quiet nod. But most were strangers' suits and lanyards, the machinery of a world she had only glimpsed from the outside. Dorian stepped to the podium, his tie neatly knotted expression unreadable. This isn't a press event, he began, voice firm. It's a correction. Clicking pens stilled. The murmur in the back quieted. Over the past year, we've had unprecedented turnover in several locations. Staff burnout, morale collapse. These aren't numbers on spreadsheets. They are names, people, stories we failed to hear. He paused, gaze sweeping the room. Then as of today, Tessa Griggs will be placed on a 30-day administrative leave while an independent review examines management conduct across our restaurant network. This review team will include both internal representatives and community voices. Several heads turned toward Evelyn. Dorian continued, measured. Our culture rewarded efficiency and overlooked empathy. That ends now. A hush settled like dust. Dorian motioned slightly, then stepped aside. Ms. Evelyn Hart has graciously agreed to share a few words. Evelyn. Her legs resisted at first, muscles stiff with the kind of anxiety that never shows in photos. She rose, slowly walked to the podium, and drew in one steady breath. I'm not a speaker, she began quietly. I'm just a waitress. Or, I was. A ripple of awkward laughter faded quickly. I'm also a mother, and I was married to a man who once baked a cake for a dishwasher. A smiley face in frosting. Cost $3 in ingredients. Got him fired. She glanced down, then back up. He never recovered, not because he lost the job, but because it taught him something ugly. Kindness doesn't fit on a balance sheet. Cameras clicked. I served soup to a hungry man. Not to rebel, just because he was hungry. And I lost my job like Dane, like too many others. Her voice didn't tremble. I'm not here for money or revenge. I'm here to ask a question. This company forgot. What does it cost to care? She stepped back without fanfare, returning to her seat. Questions came fast. Ms. Hart, are you pursuing legal action? She glanced toward Dorian. No, I'm not here to collect damages. I'm here to recover something more important. What's that? Her smile was soft. Decency. Reporters turned their focus on Dorian plans, audits, accountability. But Evelyn's eyes drifted to the stage's edge where Miles sat on Carmen's lap, chewing the ear of a stuffed bear. When the noise settled, Dorian moved to the table at center stage. From a leather folder, he drew a stack of papers. The Kensington Cares Initiative, he said. Policy overhaul, employee-led community informed. We want you on the founding board. She blinked. Me, you've lived what we ignored. No one better suited to help fix it. The contract stayed untouched for a beat. No one at that table ever sat with my husband, she whispered. No one understood what that cake meant. Dorian nodded slowly. I didn't, and I should have. The words weren't scripted. The room held still, no applause, no gestures, just a table, a nameplate, and a pen. Evelyn reached forward, turned the folder around. Read the title, Highgrove Community Initiative, Founding Member Agreement. Dorian closed it gently. No one understands the consequences better, he said, than someone who survived them. Sunlight slanted through Stonebridge Grill's windows, scattering gold across polished tables, and a vase of daffodils at the entrance. The air smelled of cinnamon and rosemary. Evelyn stepped in, wearing a pale blue blouse, sleeves rolled shoulders, looser than they had been in years. Slush clung to her boots, but she barely noticed. By the window, Miles bent over his crayons, tongue caught between his teeth. Behind the counter, Carmen caught Evelyn's glance and half smiled before pointing her pen at a young server wrestling with the espresso machine. Still hates milk foam, Carmen mouthed. Evelyn grinned and made her way past the regulars and new faces, pausing briefly at the edge of table 7. The wood had been refinished, stained a richer mahogany edges, smoothed. But the same soft light pooled here in the afternoons, filtered through the same set of windows that once framed a silent exchange between a waitress and a man with no wallet. She sat down. A leather-bound journal weighted in the center, weighted open with a salt shaker. On the first page, clipped to the margin, was a photograph, old, slightly faded. A round chocolate cake topped with uneven lettering in blue frosting. Happy birthday, Raoul. A messy, smiley face underneath. Evelyn blinked slowly. Beneath the photo, someone had scrawled, I baked this for my dishwasher last April. Thought I'd lose my job. I didn't, because someone somewhere changed the rules. Whoever you are, thank you. She turned the page. More notes. Servers in Minneapolis. Managers in Austin. Line cooks in Pittsburgh. Some funny, some aching, all of them real. Together they formed a larger canvas, human voices pressing back against the machine. A shadow fell across the table. A glass of water slid into place. Carmen had arrived without a word. She likes her tables neat, she muttered, nodding at the straightened silverware. Old habits, Evelyn replied. Carmen reached into her apron and produced a small folded card. Figured you'd want to do the honors. The cardstock smoothed beneath Evelyn's fingers. Printed in her own handwriting. Reserved, staff, meal, and human kindness. She rose, set it at the center of the table, and stepped back. No speech, no gesture, just a quiet claim over a space once heavy with silence and suspicion. Now it held a name, a purpose. Miles bounded over, tugging her sleeve, a purple streak drawing, fluttering in his grip. Mom, look, I made a soup dragon. She crouched. A soup dragon? Yeah. It breathes hot broth and gives soup to anyone who's sad. Her laughter came light. She kissed his forehead. That's exactly what the world needs. He darted off again. Carmen lingered. We're getting applications again, she said. People heard. They want to work here. Evelyn kept her eyes on the sign. Then let's give them more than a job. Across the room, a hostess guided an old man into a booth. A mother wrangled 2 toddlers over fries. Someone turned up the radio, soft jazz crackling through the speakers. The room didn't cheer. It didn't transform in an instant. But the tension was gone. It welcomed. At table 7, Evelyn drew a pen from the journal's spine, opened to a fresh page, and wrote, One winter I lost something I thought I couldn't live without. But it taught me this. Sometimes a second chance doesn't look like a miracle. Sometimes it just looks like a table, a bowl of soup, and someone who says yes instead of no. She capped the pen, leaned back, and let the room's low hum rise around her. Outside, snow thinned to slush along the curb. Sunlight stretched gold across the sidewalk. A child laughed near the window. A wind chime caught the breeze. And just like that, table 7 became more than wood and polish. It became a reminder that kindness is not weakness. And standing up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means staying. Sometimes it means rewriting the rules in the same place they broke you. Evelyn didn't rise by leaving. She rose by remaining and choosing differently. If that moved, you don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world.